then Toma Jambo Simji, the law, the Ganges in any, so that you the Jambo Simji local yore, the Kachu Kami and Kachu Kang, the Tiapi on the local Sakin law, the Saki won't be so Ganges in any. Rang sem the Zama, some the Nadimiva, a Chago, some Dadimiva, Chino Saja Chimbotara, the reality that Dandi, the Nimbotita, Dandi, the Yumba, Shelanki, Yore, Toma, the Saming Go, Saja Chimbot, Homer Sipana. This is the Jumbo simply had a car Chimbotina and don't got you that moment which that's what in something to go with the check lawyer that he don't go check law and say lawyer check it this is some of my check the song of the oh that's the question you get to put the comment oh some get it wrong as that is now I want to just a dandy is there is a new moment talk you know Shedangi Materna, Trita, take Sajat woman who did Shedangi Maha on a 3 theatre, Nibola Samba semi body. The darling Jijin, Jijin, Medemni, Rangapatan, Jumana, Jesewa, some with the something Jim, Mari, Tassin, Chasam, Maria Lavella, take a chip of my tongue, mother paying your money, 3 table, jump to St. Jesus. Tang, the same gone. 30 years at the
So we will begin the practice with Refuge and Bodhichitta. We recite the Refuge and Bodhichitta prayers. And so that is something that we always actually do. We always read those opening prayers, and then also sometimes, depending on what the topic of our teaching, we also are reading the book, the little book that goes along with the teachings. Like yesterday, we read the Mahamudra book as opening prayer. But then, so when it comes to actual practice, what we actually need to practice here is that the point of the practice is that we need to purify our mind. We need to rid the mind of self-grasping. And when the mind becomes completely pure, then that itself is Mahamudra. And so therefore we need to apply an antidote to self-grasping, because from self-grasping the other afflictive emotions like anger arise. So therefore, in the beginning, in order to be even able to see Mahamudra, we need to first of all cultivate love and compassion as a basis. And that is why the refuge prayers and the motivation of bodhicitta are so important. And then within that, especially, there is a very unique prayer that is unique to the Jigong Kagyu lineage. And here in the very beginning, in the outset, we actually must cultivate love and compassion towards our enemies, first and foremost. And so when you read those opening prayers, you also have to really meditate on the meaning of that. You really have to actually integrate that into your mind. Otherwise, if you don't think about it and just read those words, then they are rather useless, actually. So first, we cultivate compassion for our enemies. So then here at this point, you need to reflect, why do I need to cultivate compassion for my enemy, and can I actually even do that? And now if I am not able to cultivate compassion for even my enemy, I'm still holding on to a self. And that will lead to all the other 6 afflictions. And as a result, I will take birth in hell and so on. And so first we think in this way, and then you recognize that if I do not liberate my true enemy, which is my own anger, my own hatred, then I will never recognize Mahamudra. So that is that is the cause that really prevents you from seeing Mahamudra. it is your own afflicted mind. And therefore, as an antidote to that, in the very beginning, it is really crucial to cultivate immeasurable love. And immeasurable love then also must pervade your enemy. And if you give rise to compassion, if you feel love and compassion for even your enemy, then that is an authentic feeling of compassion. The love that you have for your family, like your husbands and wives and children and so on, that is not that authentic kind of love. It is an aspect of love, so we can't really say that it's not love. It is love, but that kind of limited love is of really not so much benefit. And so today also again, now when you read those opening prayers of the Refuge and Bodhichitta, really think about it and meditate on the meaning. And after that, I will again share a few words of explanation on the teachings.
Sera yorin trebong yore gadin yore chuluk sosor tuta kaju lama sam chetena rana ga disati ngale rakpa khashira chadi yore mebardo thomdo shedan ki jihan jiwa serabni serlo tatu dokni shedan gi yore maung pala chu shedan tere ni ko dag no ba hatang chung chung ri shedan ga no ba sabchi more shedan yore yuni shedan sem yule yuni zongdi 좀 제발 거들 거를 가능성을 시장에 놓아서 당그래 시장 줄지 오 just 작은 놓아 주종을 시장에 놓아 채워 땡이지잖아 니 다시 하게 하고 요래 가서 조금 놓아 세는 자질들이나 시장 무슨 송 때문에 무슨 거면 자질이 시장 싸만 무슨 거도 다 작가든 치보리 파만이죠 작가든 치보리서 로치나 다 며칠 다 샤분에 하고 요래 작가도 이어 하고 요래 그 고선들이 따로 나당만 찍고를 때는 다다까지 용도 그때送요래 올래 제타를 상못하네 제자만 보고 오면 높아만 보고 오면 책 동지를 상못하네 오 니만은 저쪽 동나제 다 체도 상이 그 소나지 다 나중에 알아서 보여 뒤서는 소소 나중에 시작하고 요래 제일 상못한테 고명 그냥 근데 생기도 소시 머리 도마 생기
So it is very important to recognize the harm that is caused by our resentment, the resentment in our mind. And so now often we are not even really aware of also the benefits that we might receive from our enemies. Actually it is not so certain. Now when we only for example in Tibet we say, for example, that now the Dalai Lama has left the country and through our protection and has come to the West, and now the Dharma has spread in the West. And nowadays actually nothing could have really harmed him. So even if there has been an anger that from the enemy directed towards him, still he has arrived in the West, and nowadays actually seems that there are even more of his monasteries, and Dharma is spreading even more extensively. So now he has, for example, the Sera and Drepung and Ganden monasteries established really everywhere. That is really important to recognize. So nobody could destroy the Dharma. So, however, if there is anger, then, for example, even children separate from their parents. And basically, when there is anger, then in all lifetimes, there will only be suffering. That is what has caused all the suffering in the past, in all those lifetimes, and that is the one that will cause all the suffering in the future. Actually, now, when we put that into perspective, then the harm caused by the so-called outer enemy is very insignificant, and the real harm is actually caused by our own anger. So it is that anger that once it is in your mind, for as long as it is in your mind, you are only suffering all the time, no matter where you will go in the future in the 6 realms of samsara. So bring to mind the fault of anger and recognize that actually the harm caused by the so-called outer enemy is very small. What really causes all the harm, all the destruction is my own anger. That's my real enemy. So then from that perspective, actually, you will be able to even see that so-called outer enemy as your friend. It is because of that person you are able to recognize the anger that is actually hidden in your own mind. And without that person triggering that, you would not even be able to recognize that. So actually, from this, if you would then think that actually this enemy is even more kind than my own parents. So if you have some wisdom, then you would see it that way. You would actually see your enemy as a friend. And so that is why we read this opening prayer, starting with this, Dagdama Chikten Sumgen's opening prayer. And that actually is also now practiced in many other Kagyu traditions. And that's actually very important. So we hear a lot of teachings and we speak much about the Dharma, but what's really important is actually just that. And if you have just that motivation, then even if you just recite a single Mani mantra, you would, for example, then think, I'm doing that for all beings, and then mainly that so-called enemy. And if you think in that way, then whatever you do will lead to accumulation of merit for yourself and also others. And that fault of self-grasping will finally disappear. And then your practice of meditation will also develop. So this mind generation, this motivation is really very important. And that is why in the beginning we always start with that motivation.
사지 좀디데 가다 남다른 아니 사지 좀디데 잡시나 오 조소랑 그랑 잡고래시 고추를 남기는 고금 잡송도 같은 사지 남산네 데 랑랑 좀 속이 좀 시합 쪽거리다 시합들이 다 조금씩 오면 거기서 비답이 세대 소리 제일 차상자장 레소다 또 뭐지 다른 세대 마도만 통이 뒤잡고 제일은 사지 때문에 세대 생각이 다지 다 속다 내가 다 통이었다 내가 다 통이었지 오다 자세 다 뉴버리 다지 차지 대하고는 사지 시랍 제일 주랍고요 시랍들은 사지가 시랍 이제 대부 시랍을 세대 되는 한게 뉴모가 설사해요 사지 시랍들이 자와 뉴모가 발장해요 이 사지 이 양들이 랑랑 정도가 사지 정도 되는 다 사지 좀 시랍이 시랍 정도래 라그 시라부터 라그 샘티 주소 상계 샘지는 상계 콩그 시랍데 주지 시랍니 직과 직접 최종마도 시발이 요 말이지 시랍니 요 말이지 그래서 좀 이제 뭐 실자르시 상계 사와지서 내 세를 때는 또 소소랑 고차 때를 때는 잠도 받아나니 상계진 힘보 시랍부터 저 뜻도 많은 되게 자와이 다들 나라도 나오리
So we are actually what we are attached to in this life is often what causes us the greatest harm of all. And so what we are attached to is our body and our possessions, our dear ones, like children, husbands, and wives, and so on. All of these attachments in this life are actually what are causing the real great harm. So that really like hurts us, these things. And then on a smaller scale also, for example, there is like harsh words, for example. When somebody speaks something harshly to us, then we get angry. So whether it's on a larger scale or a smaller scale, so whether someone actually threatens our body and our family or life, or whether somebody just says something mean to us, all these objects of our anger, that's what normally we call that is our enemy. So they are those individuals that trigger our anger. And that anger, that actually also manifests on a very subtle level. For example, when it comes to enjoying any of the 5 sense pleasures. For example, if you have to eat something that you don't want to eat, then you feel like, I don't want to eat that. I don't like that. And so that's also actually an aversion. And that's a subtle form of anger or aggression. And so all of that prevents you from seeing Mahamudra. It is because the mind is obscured by afflictive emotions. And so if you have wisdom, discriminating wisdom, you recognize that. You recognize even that subtle form of resentment as an afflictive emotion. And so you develop the wisdom that knows what to do and what not to do. The other day I was watching the life story of the Buddha, and in there, regarding seeking refuge, the Buddha had said, you are your own refuge, you are your own master. I can only show you the path, but you have to actually protect yourself. And how you protect yourself is through your own discriminating wisdom. And that is one thing that most of us don't know how to do. We don't know how to protect ourselves. And that is because we really only care about this life and nothing else. And because we only care about this life, we develop many thoughts of attachment and aversion, and we accumulate a lot of negative karma, not knowing that. And that is ignorance. That is the dull mind that doesn't recognize that. The mind that can only see this life and not beyond. And so the Buddha had said, it's not just this life. You have to look beyond this life. There are future lives. You have to not only look at the temporary, but also at the ultimate in the long term. And so if you possess some intelligence, you will understand that. And you would understand that actually my own enemy, my true enemy, are my afflictive emotions. And so that wisdom that knows that is the actual Buddha. And that Buddha then knows how to practice the Dharma. So there is 2 kinds of wisdom. There is the Buddha wisdom, and there is the worldly wisdom. And with the worldly wisdom, we actually accumulate a lot of afflictive emotions in this life, only being concerned about this life. And on the other hand, the Buddha wisdom purifies those afflictive emotions. So the Buddha said, you have to protect yourself. You are your own master. The Buddha cannot do that for you. And how you protect yourself is through your own discriminating wisdom. your own mind. Your own mind actually is the Buddha. The Buddha himself had said all beings are actually Buddhas. So in truth, your own wisdom and the Buddha's wisdom are actually exactly the same mind. Temporarily there seems to be a difference in the strength of that wisdom, but it's the same mind, just like there is no division in water, there's no two water and so on. So Lord Jigten Sumgön had said that all that is done in the field of knowable things is done by the Buddha. So that is your own mind. And that is also what we are introduced to during the refuge vow. Now, refuge card that I have created, there it says, I take refuge in this discriminating wisdom, which is the essence, the heart essence of the Buddha. So to clarify that point, I really thought about it, and I created this refuge card.
So now we'll read those opening prayers. And so they're in the yellow book, starting on page 1.
Awesome. Awesome.
And if there's anyone who doesn't have a book, there are more books right up here. All mothers, sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mothers, sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mothers, sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion.
Body and the young Gomri, Gangen Tata. Ye lam reverso ye no simji samji send saye tavet lam kare dungil targo yoret lam tile tile ta jamro dengsu ta ji de den pa ji lo chu ta la la din ro de ma ni bo jang jang phem de ma bo phem de ha ja ga o te romani bo tham ji la to sa tang tile ye sem no so dungil ko tap go yus te nga chu show yoret lam kare le ju de shi horet le ju de shi tile dewa jote ta sambata kinji ba ha ko sons dewa kare tondo de ta sa system so ta ko samo so dewa lo dra de sa chi bori ni dra de to kya mare so lo de tomna de ni dewa de ko do sa chu se un de ni to yore de ran tang to sang tong ti ji ni tong na de ang pe bori ro ma mo yo sa yore de ka do tra de li de tra jang kar chi bori tra li ta sa de Consciously,
so we have read the book, and then the book also explains how to actually meditate. Then, so our little teaching book now after the opening prayers. And so now, to summarize, we always go through 3 steps. So we have a basis, a path, and a fruition, a result. And the actual basis is the mind of all sentient beings. And that is like a field where we can plant something. That's the basis. And then what is the path? The path is that we want to become free from suffering. And so then through this path, we first start with refuge, and then we engage in this path. And so we have actually done that, read these prayers for so many years, for over a decade now. And many of the disciples here are senior disciples, so I'm extremely happy to see you all here, and that you're still bringing that to mind and engaging in practice. And so now, how you should reflect here is that how you should see the basis. First of all, and on the basis you think, I want to be free from suffering. And so that's why I have actually, all that years ago, that's why I have entered the Buddha Dharma, because I want to be free from suffering. And that is why I want to practice the path. And so what's the path then? For the path, what's most important is to understand karma, cause and effect. So now, having learned that, then you know the cause of happiness is love and compassion. Now I have understood that. And what is the result? The result is to think my enemy is actually most precious. In fact, the enemy is nothing bad at all. And if you have that state of mind, then you really have achieved the result here first on the relative level. So this is how you should reflect. And so maybe some of you have to leave later on. And so for this reason, this morning we will first start with answering the questions. And then after that, when we are done, then I will continue to teach according to my own abilities, to my best abilities. So then the first question here is, when I'm resting in some level of shamatha, how to switch to vipassana or langtong and back again to shamatha?
Tambodi shinegi rimba nala jok charwa shine dis komgi yoro kom shimbari shine kom shimbe kabla deni langtong ta langtong dis komra ti jora khana dangore ta tang shine langtong kongores yang langtong kombe kabla yang shine ta shine dis kom gosare ti phacho dogoro shine langtong phala ti phacho khanren dogore
신의 곰이 상통은 다시는 곰 상통은 줘도 되고 뭐냐면 줘야요 말이 신의 곰이 선대 때문에 내 탑들이 내 바차를 딱걸 내 바차는 내 바까블라더니 다시 시바사고 되겠대나 오 다시는 남카타고 생고나지 하고지 오 생고나지 하고지 세르는 상통 집어리 제 상통 갈거를 오 말면 통 마송 다라바다 생문에서 남카타버리 제 상통 라고요 제 미도 가면 갈래 로고를 랑이 줄지 로고를 마도 다시는 곰 다상통 곰데 여 말이 이렇게 또 되네 이거 이제 고원이 남말 좋아들이 이제 삼바팀 거 대신에 차대요리 이제 가면 따봉 걸 야선 상통 제나 송독 집에나 이제 냠디요리
So when you're first you're practicing shamatha, so you're practicing calm abiding, and so it's no regarding switching to vipassana or langtong. It is not like you're like walking there, like saying now I'm at shamatha, now I'm going to vipassana. So it's not like you're going somewhere and then you're coming back to shamatha or something like that. But first you practice shamatha in order to stabilize the mind. So the mind has an ability to remain still. And when you're able to remain still, at that time then you can actually look at your mind. Then you can look at your own awareness, your clear awareness. And when you look at that mind, you will see it is like space. So then you will see the nature of mind. And that is what we call vipassana, or special insight. And what you see here is the experience is like that you feel it is something that was already there but that I haven't seen before. My own mind is just like space. And so that realization is what we call vipassana, or special insight. And in order to get there, you need to practice with diligence. It is a gradual path. So it's not that you sometimes practice shamatha and then you come back to vipassana and so on, and you go back and forth like that, but they build on each other. So first you need to have a stable mind, and then you go on to the special insight. And actually it begins in the beginning when we have first cultivated immeasurable love. That is actually what we can call shamatha, calm abiding. And then when you get to great equanimity, this immeasurable equanimity, then here you are then resting within a meditative state of vipassana. And actually, ultimately, shamatha and vipassana are actually a union, so they are not practiced separately.
lang통 이민이 제발 sepsawo napto me paden thongne ding oni sene mai bata napto chi yong ya ji shik thoko re ho ni ba me cha ngal ta chi langtong ni ta te ni la lin so du men ne shin ni rab do di ba langtong ge ni mo na ban jong par shi de napto ji pa ma ro cha ra sa de napto che la de shik tu ta langtong ni cha yo re je sa wo shi ba zang na ta shi langtong 도만 낳고 요새 동네들이 나도들 발마초를 나도 식도 받대 상통
So then, what is the difference between now having a state of vipassana or not? And so it has to do with your ability to let go of thoughts, even if they arise. So first, through shamatha, you have developed a state of calm abiding where no thought arises in the mind. And then, even if a thought arises, if you have an ability If you're able to let go of that thought, and that thought does not affect you in any way at all, that is a sign of actually practicing vipassana, especially insight. In the 37 Bodhisattva practices, it says, you practice vipassana founded on a perfect state of calm abiding, shamatha. And with that state of calm abiding and vipassana, you destroy afflictive emotions as they arise. So when thoughts arise, you don't follow that thought, and you let it go, let it dissolve on its own. So if you're able to let go of that thought in this way, then it is a sign that you are practicing vipassana. So there is clarity, and that recognizes the thought and lets go of that thought. So that is what we actually call vipassana. So it is the ability to not become controlled by the thought, so to not pursue the thought, and then also the ability to let go of that thought. Then the next question. It is said that to practice Mahamudra effectively, you must have certainty in the view of a mind nature, at least a glimpse. Since there is nothing to see when you look at mind, is this certainty in the view a confidence in nothing to see?
tawa de la sembingo tawa de la yang dengo yo ra ni shi go yo re da yu samya tong this tong to go yo ra se gi ngo de dili tong me ga bla kan tong ya yo ma ra sam da ga bla chi tong go yo ma re dili de la ni shi gi go yo ra dili ni shi se ya de ra ni shi se ya de kayang tom ma tu pa ki ding di reves ni shi se ya de
제 말에 등지와디 네 사여지 모시와디라 니요 말이면 생 님도 없이 나이 님도 우상네 제라 하고는 과차오나 상통다와디라 양탄에서 사절 사 나이 님도 우상하고 제 과지 요아들이 시제들은 양도 공네 저희는 옛날에는 당대 세상 연구요래 제 공치 참탄을 하지 마검나 소용고요고 소리야 보지는 마검나 용어가 마검을 하지 용어감이 들이 세상사안에 매화랑을 제래지 강염을 타쳐야 돼요. 그래서 문제들이 랑게 갑들이 되는 랑가랑 다 주고요. 들어봐랑 다 줘서 제 마소제 버드당 이제 이메 라서 버드니 세상 미월에 최소망화 되는 다지 때로 상속선을 속자야면 사제적으로 속자야 자원을 줘 말이 삼바세미를 속자고래 삼바세미를 속 맞아 삼바세미 바주를 맞지 빠르다 다 줘야 돼 용하고요.
So not regarding this confidence, it is not actually a certainty in the view here. You asked the certainty in the view. Is this certainty in the view a confidence in nothing to see? So Rinpoche said it's not just that actually. That confidence here is the confidence that arises when we practice really see Mahamudra is the seeing of not just nothing but no duality. You realize that there is no separation, no duality between self and other. So that is what you see, what you realize. So in the view of vipassana, you realize that self and other are not separate. There's no delineation. So first you understand that view, and then you experience that view, and through the experience, then you gain a certainty. And so to gain that certainty, you must practice, habituate to that again and again. And until you have really gained that certainty, there will always be some doubts in your mind, always wondering, is it this, is it or not? There will always be some doubts. And so you continue your practice, you continue to meditate, and if you practice with diligence, then sometimes actually what happens is that sometimes even if you're not really deliberately meditating, then just naturally an experience arises. And often also when you're actually meditating, it doesn't arise. So that experience that arises is that naturally sometimes arises on its own as a result of diligent practice, is that there is a moment of complete freedom of doubt. There is no doubt in that moment, and you just know that is it. You decide that in that very moment, you know, you're completely certain that is it, just naturally. And until you realize that, there will always be doubts in the mind of wondering, is it that or not? And when there are many doubts in the mind, it also means that there is a strong self-grasping in the mind. And for this reason, what you really should make an effort in is the cultivation of bodhicitta. You should not make the greater effort in Mahamudra, but you should make the greater effort in immeasurable love. Because until true immeasurable love has arisen in your mind, it will be very difficult to gain that certainty.
대통령이 탈토파지 나에서 나 하고 말이야 나 쌀 문제 두고 말이야 나 문제 말씀하라 대통령 탈토파 지금 거 도대요 지금 탈토파지 또 나지 지금 문제 거 말이지 나지 통야요 말이야 이 삼바심이 깨는지 항생미만 로고요. 정말 저들이 가리나 다 좋다고요.
So the ultimate doubt is actually the self. And we don't see the self at all. It is very difficult for us to even recognize the self. We cannot see it at all, actually. And so how we can recognize it? The ultimate doubt is actually fear, and the ultimate, what fear actually is self-grasping. So we can actually say that self-grasping is fear. They are the same thing. And this is the way to recognize self-grasping. Otherwise, it is almost impossible to see that self-grasping. And so when you cultivate immeasurable love, then there is no fear. And if there is no fear, then you can really gain certainty or resolve any issue. Next question. What is the difference between the ordinary mind, the tamalgishiba, and the discursive consciousness?
Dini keba kare yores tamalgishiba chigra, tamalgishiba tang tira yuve namshi yora bata namto yuve namshi de, namto yuve semdi, yuve sem. Dini keba kare yores.
제 남시다 이식 제발지 남시의 참말이 요래서 우리는 남시의 상지리 상마지들 나진이 통거래 니 통거래 그 서로 열대 남바탐지도 소와 함께 하고 요래 그랬던 지지 지는 지지를 과태는 남시라고 그래 서로 남바시 봐지 드니들 이지들 남시 코랑 오로 딱 제당 것들이 쌀을 이제 딱지했다가 들이 코를 모든 남파는 이 차들이 그 남파는 님이 봐 들이 문에 통구요래 다 이시지 어디 시바됐다 나이 좀 말이 너는 니진 좀 나이 니진 상처나 들이 다 이시 가리더니 얘네 요배 예시서 37집에 시시사지 남들 내 토만이 요래 망고라 요래 Zamping go to Carson, Zamping Mission, Namdi, they're Taketa, the Shibasa was Namdang, Chipamila Charlie. Take it at Tamsi Shita, where you saw Jetam Jimmy here. Telling Cording your ranking. The Hako, Sabasa, the Hako, just now want to rank the same. The lines of luminary. Don't have with them, but it's a doctor, Salem, your Napsi, Tata Napsin, the Ranki, Tamar Shibasi, Tamar Shiba, Jimba, and Gare, Dajin, or the Babe was a Jiba Lapore, the Dajin, the Congress, the Naris, there is a Natola Beneco, so they don't come to Kaka Yoris, more than Sima the Bar. There's something, but they don't do a champion, the one of the Japai Marabia song. They were the case of the Nato to particular Laro Yore, don't not all the Sanchi, Chala Lavi, Laro, the Jamaica, Chazon, the Dajin in Mera, the same thing. Dajin in Zoxanata Ishi, Dajin in Tom Capsule, the Katse young Anthony, Nashi. They get the Sanjira, Julie, or Yusong, Jarman was singing the Sanjay, but as we see, not she is the capacity, that's Sanjay is the Hako to Yore, then she touches away. They must home part of Nachiram or Mato part of the Nachi, Nachi, the Pakaku, Nachi, so she was on water. Don't something die, and I'm cut out charge. Die she, oh, teacher the touch on dying, looks at the touch over.
So the difference now between, again, this ordinary mind and the discursive consciousness is that the difference is that there's the dualistic consciousness and there is primordial wisdom. That is the difference. So we all have consciousness. And now it is a dualistic consciousness. And actually that consciousness itself is actually the Buddha ultimately. But until you attain enlightenment, you will see a duality of self and other. And you will see outer objects that you experience. The consciousness experiences those objects, those outer objects, and experiences pleasure, experiences pain, and so forth. Now, also, actually, nowadays in this world, science is flourishing, and science is also using the quality of this consciousness, this intelligence, but they are facing or turning it outward. So the dualistic consciousness, the discursive consciousness, is projected outward, and what it does is it discerns the outer appearing objects. And when that same consciousness then is turning inward, so when you look at that consciousness clearly, then it becomes like space, the experience. And then within space, you understand that there is no duality. And when you see that, when you see non-duality, then that is what we call primordial wisdom. So it is when you see that there is no duality between self and other. It is when all dualistic grasping is dispelled. That is then primordial wisdom. Primordial wisdom is called that because it has primordial because it has been there since beginningless primordial times. And wisdom because it knows, it is a knowledge of everything, of all that exists. So that awareness will always be there. It has always been there, and it is here now, and it will always be there in future times. Even if this world comes to an end, it will always be there. And so it is just one mind, actually. So from the ultimate perspective, this consciousness and wisdom are really one, space-like by nature. And when you realize it, we also call it the all-knowing, the omniscient wisdom of the Buddha. And it is that mind that creates all of samsara and nirvana. In the 37 Bodhisattva practices, in the verse on the ultimate truth, it says, appearances are one's own mind. From the beginning, mind's nature is free from the extremes of elaboration. So these words actually show that very clearly. So that consciousness itself, now the discursive consciousness, that itself actually is the ordinary consciousness or mind, ultimately. Or we also say the naked awareness. So first, there is dualistic grasping to self and other. So it's not naked. But when there is no more grasping, it becomes naked awareness. Now there is the concept of there is me and there is him and so forth. And then that consciousness that perceives it that way then experiences all kinds of sensations of pleasure and pain and so forth. And it holds all things that appear to truly exist, and it believes in their own characteristics. So Milarepa had said that the instruction is that I have the instruction of realizing that actually happiness and suffering, or pleasure and pain, are not any different. They are the same. So happiness and suffering are the same because this feeling of happiness is just a thought, and suffering is also just a thought. And both thoughts will be lost. They will go away, just like a wave on water. If you do not grasp at them, they don't really actually exist. And so when you see that, when you really see your mind, what you see is that there is no duality between self and other, and that is what we call primordial wisdom. And for as long as you see a duality of self and other, no matter how much you learn or train, it still is what is like doing all these things is still the discursive mind. And that discursive mind by nature also is actually the Buddha, but we have not recognized that. Lord Chigden Sumgön had said that I have now recognized that the mind itself is the Buddha, and I have never separated from, actually now I realize that I have never separated from the Buddha, which is my own mind. So that is what you realize when this discursive consciousness then transforms into primordial wisdom. Then you recognize that your own mind is actually the Buddha. And at this point, you gain a true certainty. That is when you understand everything. And until then, until you realize the nature of that consciousness, it is still just called the discursive mind that is projected outward. So it is one mind, but it depends on how it is facing. If it is facing outward, then it discerns all the outer objects. And then we call it the discursive mind. And if it is facing inward and it looks at itself, then there's nothing to be seen. It becomes like space. And what you realize then is that within that, there is no duality of self and other. So this is what you realize when it faces inward.
사키나니 지난 말이 될 말이 메지 혼때 니가 랑 샘서동 남과다는 통화티는 말이를 매송 납성 오늘 라니 소진만 기내되게 최당은 롱메 바래지 가고 죽은 롱메지 제 배강지 롱메가 남과래지 지리는 남과다를 납성지 시람 중분은 갈라고도 소소랑 이시주에 와송을 나서 미미제 사자집에 동 차상은이 책 싸워 소소랑도 랑그 남치지 뭐랑 통소나 함께 이식이 중요해요 책 동적으로 놓고요 뒤등 동적으로 맞으면 뒤지 까지 캐는 거 말이지 산지가라 다다 간이 좀 캐리냐 사자집 못 캐리면 산지가 동당고 돼 말라 산지랑 데서 말이 공직된 감 장미 발에 주중 홀로 장미 바꿔 요새 책 카카카카만 보여서 주중 홀로 장미 바 꺼내야 책 카카 동직 바인시 동직 하고서는 당시 하고도 하고 사회에서 그래서 너 땡땡 잡고는 송노래 대 당시지는 송직도 뭐는 너를 날이 서두면 라마 삼십 같이 가서 날이 서두면 나 책다 책동문에 다신시는 소리들이 대외들 따위 다 주로 대체 소소랑을 다도 인직적 고메 다른 건 남시들을 딱 제단 다른 건 남시들을 딱 제단나 나 남시 좀 뭐 때는 사보 하고 송 남파다를 하고 살아 대리들이 대하고서 싸마 가리라고 되고 무슨 신기도 감선 말이야 예시 못다 정말 조자 쳐버서 뒤통은 운이 대책점 말은이 시즌 소화도 계속고요 뭐나 다당이 말 돈이 통으로 가리 남가진 남가리지 남가 나버진이지 뭐저 로버트 말이지 사지 대서서 또 당시 양다용도 상호동 동문에 대해서 이렇게 다음 말이 들리지 못했던 말에 대해서 동당거든 봐서 당시 서르딩의 동문은 양천이 들리는 거로
Also, one other line in the Mahamudra teachings is, it says in the teachings that all phenomena are included within that. So there is no phenomena not included in that. And that is, all the phenomena of samsara and nirvana are included within that mind. And so that is your own mind. When you look at your own mind that is clear and empty, within that, everything is complete within that mind. Or in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, it says that Chenrezig sees that all phenomena neither come nor go. So that is Chenrezig's mind. An example of Chenrezig's mind is, it is like space. So now you understand, Chenrezig's mind is like space. And then corresponding to that, then what does it say, for example, in the Heart Sutra? It says that primordial wisdom is something that can only, it belongs to one's own recognition, one's own experience. It is something that only you can experience yourself, because it is inexpressible in being beyond words and beyond thoughts. So when you yourself see the nature of your own consciousness, then everything becomes the sphere or the scope of primordial wisdom, and everything is included within that, but it is inexpressible. So this is how, looking at various different instructions, this is how you have to know to gather all of these into one essential point. They all come down to one essential meaning that they are trying to describe. And if you're not able to do that, if you cannot see that common ground that they're all pointing at, then often people then don't accept some of the words of the Buddha. For example, like Mahamudra, and separating it out from other teachings and so on. That is, in brief, the ultimate truth of the Buddha. And the Buddha had said in the Samadhi Raja Sutra, he had said that I have turned the wheel of Dharma limitlessly in limitless worlds. Even though I have spoken many words and the words are distinct, they all have a single meaning. And if you understand that, then you understand everything. And so the Buddha himself has said that we need to bring it all back to a single essential meaning. So, for example, if you just understand the 37 Bodhisattva practices, then later whatever instructions or teachings you receive from any other Lama, any other teacher, then you will be able to bring it all back to the 37 practices and really recognize how ultimately it all is complete, contained within those practices. And if you know how to do that, bring it all to one single essence, then you have really actually resolved the view. And once you have resolved the view, that's really all you need, and you don't need anything else. So that is, resolving the view now is to recognize the nature of your own mind, your own consciousness. So when you recognize your own mind, you see that my own consciousness is clear and it is empty, just like space. Now I have understood that. Or how does the secret mantra, the Vajrayanam, explain that? For example, in the Yamantaka practice, it says that the 3 realms are the immeasurable palace and all beings are the deity and so forth. So when you really understand that, then when hearing that, a real feeling, an experience of those words will actually arise within you. And so now, in our state, what we see is our thoughts, the thoughts in the mind, like the clouds. We see clouds in the sky. But the Buddha himself had said that these are just adventitious obscurations. They will go away. These are not your natural state. So if you reflect on that again and again, and finally you will gain a real experience of the true nature. And that actually is beyond all explanation and words and so on. And seeing that is all that is actually necessary. And that is all that there is. And that is what we call the ultimate truth. And within that ultimate truth, all those words of all those instructions are complete. And because that is the essence, that is really the only thing that needs to be practiced.
the Semji Sanji는 통시와 Semji Sanji Sanji 주문치와 참에 쓰고 고요래 생각하려고 우리 사실이 쌈트고요 말에 제물을 봤다면 저는 그 곰잡는 좀 남시만 통 이시통 남시지 고분에 다 이시는 전에 다 잡은 거는 어떻게 이리 다 심지만 통 사지 통데 다 거기 심지 삼지 사지를 이리 통속데 뭐는 나는 라비오래 주로나 말 뭐는 거 양당으로라 어떻게 싸고 요래 제도 소소 그랬더니 심지 사지를 가진 통나야 다 랑게 낚시실 고프를 따래 이제 니요 말이야 니는 기본대 버거 송말에 기본대 버거 시합 니요레스 이제 팀이 시합된 이제 시합 니요레스 다 꼭방 앞에 차잖아 시합이 올라서 말이지 그 산지 공부는 니요 말이지 님이 니스미를 시송을 다 차자 차가래지 저쪽에 파카고는 나인이 통과된 남시에 샤지 그 하고성선은 시바테랑 지시에 샤지 공가 뭐게 베테데 주로 양당에서 삼노당 계당을 들랑 제대로 다 좋다는 눈이 다 좋이
So there's one instruction by Milarepa, and so now before that, we say that you have to see all beings as Buddhas, or all beings are actually Buddhas. And so that is actually maybe even a premature instruction because it requires something else to happen before you're even able to see that. So we say that not all beings are really Buddhas, but that's not really how we see it. Because in our mind, even though we understand that intellectually, in our mind truly we really can't see it that way. We can't really see beings that way. And so there is a very important experience that Milarepa had passed on. on how that actually is developed. And so Milarepa had said that when you actually meditate, and that is what he had done, what he first saw is that he said, I do not see the discursive consciousness, I only see primordial wisdom. So that is, he had seen the nature of the consciousness, the discursive consciousness, and seeing the true nature of consciousness is to see primordial wisdom. So that is what we call consciousness transforms into primordial wisdom. And then, after he had seen that, then he had said, I do not see sentient beings, I only see Buddhas. So only at that point was he able to actually see that, not before that, in other words. So these instructions are found in the songs of realization, in the Milarepa's songs. I would really advise you, my Dharma friends, to read those instructions, those songs by Milarepa again and again, because they are really very clear. So that song here really shows when we are actually, when we can see all sentient beings as Buddhas. And actually, when you see all beings as Buddhas, then that in itself is a sign that the discursive consciousness has already transformed into primordial wisdom, because that is what he had realized before, and then he saw all beings as Buddhas. And so ultimately then, what he realized here is that there is no duality. And actually, once I had a discussion about that with Khenpo Tempel, and Khenpo Tempel explained that there is two kinds of wisdom. There is the worldly, the mundane wisdom, and then there is the transcendental wisdom, so the wisdom that transcends the mundane. And now that's what he said. And then how I felt about that, and maybe I am just a very simple-minded, not so smart person, but the way I saw it is that how can there be two? In the state of enlightenment, there cannot be two. There's only one mind. So there probably isn't two. That's how it appears to me. It is just like you have one finger. So for example, if you're facing outward, it's like this discursive consciousness that faces outward and that sees all those objects. But then if that same hand faces inwards, then you're still seeing the same hand, but from a different perspective. So you're seeing the true nature of your consciousness, and that seeing is then called primordial wisdom. So that was my discussion with Khenpo, but it's also a point that I invite you, my Dharma friends, to reflect upon again and again, because it really is something that you have to decide upon yourself. Then the next question. As a beginner, how to have confidence that one is practicing Mahamudra and not just basic shamatha.
le thambo barwa le thambo imbe kapla ta ngangune sakye thembu kom yus dira ta takas shine mayimba unna nga sakye thembu kom yus khanda ha khogris
잘 공이 시바되는 일이 신이 야도고를 사지치고는 도나 저는 당 남도 미베센데 당 하고고래 남도 삼체들 센데 하고는 들이 신이 라고요래 들이 유는 뭐 저는 들이 다 사람을 말마죠 남조지에 시켜요 들이 봐주세요 센들이 봐주세요 요거다 상호면서 정말 사자치고 공지받을 말이 신이지 저래 제가 사지쳐 버려 너 소리더니 실내에서 항통 들리지 뭐 이런 말이 들이대라 들이대 냠처럼 몇 타톡을 제가 들이 사자치고 자연구조래 매 사자치고 공부치받을 당고 실내 것도 고래 실내 것도 들이 다다 실내는 내 마탑을 가셔요 내 마탑을 가셔요나 들이 나도 뭐시 시바스 접어서 뭐좀 대설려고 오 나도 같이 하고 들진 나도 지 지선마랑 지나 들이 시바지 자장도 제들이 공부 탑효량 자신의 쪽으로 막을 공부 탑라면요 사례 때문에 실내 제가 사지 쳐볼 가까이요 말이지 신의 공부 감시네 문에지 내용은 생활을 하시들 딱시다는 이는 자체 못 차대요. 나도 직접 몇 번 나과서 차대 이제 사자지 못 차요. 그래. 들리는 시제 말이지 산소센터 반대나 대통령이 그래.
So that is actually, as you mentioned before, it is something that there's not two separate practices. So there's not on the one hand shamatha and then you go to Mahamudra. So it is the same practice that develops gradually. And so the first thing to understand is the mind that is free of thoughts, the thought-free mind. And that is what we call shamatha, calm abiding. And then you habituate that for a long time, and then that is often explained as progressing along the various stages and the paths of practice, or we call it the 4 yogas and so on. So basically it's the mind developing in stages, just like flower growing from a seed to a sprout to a flower. So there is no other Mahamudra than that. Actually, we can even say that shamatha is Mahamudra, ultimately. On the sutra path, it is also explained that all that is to be really practiced is the union of shamatha and vipassana. So the ultimate result of practice is what we call Mahamudra. But then if you think that now I want to practice Mahamudra, and am I really practicing Mahamudra? Actually, it is all one practice. It is just developing increasingly a greater stability of the mind. And so that begins with practicing shamatha, gaining an ability to abide still without thoughts. And there is some individuals for whom it is more difficult to abide still. They have a lot of thoughts. And also for them, maybe it would be good to focus on just recognizing those thoughts. So there is an awareness that recognizes those thoughts. And then you just try to recognize that awareness. So from that perspective, then it might become a little bit easier, even if there is a lot of thoughts. And so basically, whatever thought arises, know that, recognize that clearly, and do not follow the thought. And in this way, you are gradually training in the strength of your awareness. And meditation develops in that way. And then shamatha arises naturally as a result of that stability. So that is maybe a method of a method for someone whose mind cannot abide still. That is shamatha, but then also it actually is Mahamudra. So we cannot really separate shamatha and Mahamudra actually. Actually, shamatha is Mahamudra. They're not two separate things or two separate practices. So when you practice really, the mind abides in a still, tranquil state, that is shamatha. So as you abide in that state, and then look at the mind, this abiding mind, then the experiences, it becomes very vast. So the mind that is free of thoughts and clearly seen becomes vast, just like the sky. And then that is what we understand as Mahamudra. But then, that is how it is said, but then actually, even though we actually might see that, we still don't have that certainty if there is no bodhicitta on the basis. So for as long as bodhicitta is not on the basis, there will always be some doubts about that.
다다 사자치보다 저도 고민 이거 뭐 신의 고 맡아서 제일 다다 신의 통통별 계속적으로 고민해요. 갑자기 신의 남도 요버선들이 남도 미버선들이 가까시 시바도 들다 보자. 니 조람 탐지를 되게 남도라고 유모라고 지역을 시바서 뭐진지는 이 시바 남도 유모라고 판토르트 뒤지서만 장나 뒤 살자지 못 차로 요래 이몸 쪼르지 제가 배 팽겨요 쫄람 탐지르지 들라니 소리면이 진시 봐요 봐지 그런 생각에 갑을 따라지 이제 여기 진시 신의 살자지 못 차대 요래 나도 가세 torto 짜장도 다다 코처지 못 받지 장래 시랍들 나도 좀 받아 대장나 들이양지 야보차고요 제기도 rugo matne요 인남 농약 약은 차고요
So then, now if you're not able to practice Mahamudra for a long time, or even practice shamatha for a long time, even if you just have a short time, for example, you have an hour to practice, to meditate, during that time, look at the mind, that the thinking mind and the mind that is free of thinking, and discern between the thinking mind and the still mind. And then hold on to the awareness that discerning awareness that discerns, that sees that, and then bring that awareness to all your day-to-day activities. And in your day-to-day activities, then, when you're not meditating, that awareness then should recognize all the thoughts and afflictive emotions that arise. And so then, even if very strong thoughts and afflictions arise, if you're able to recognize them and not follow them, then that eventually actually will turn into the state of Mahamudra. That is what we call liberating the afflictions, liberating the thoughts. So in your day-to-day conduct, to sustain mindfulness and awareness, conscientiousness is most important. So as it is said in the 37 practices, at all times, no matter what you do, look at the state of your mind. What is the state of my mind? And that mindfulness actually is Mahamudra. And when you have that mindfulness, you are able to let go of thoughts. So in your day-to-day conduct, you are training your mind in letting go of the various thoughts that arise. It is just like actually like a sport, like an athletic training. You're exercising your mind in that way. It is like a struggle between awareness and the thought. So you are opposing those thoughts. You're not following them. And if you do that, actually, your practice will be developed really well. So that is how you can practice, even if you're not able to like seclude yourself to an isolated mountain retreat and so on. Actually, that kind of experience in a day-to-day conduct, that actually will develop into the best meditation.
다른 남치들가랑 내 사자친구에서 다 제거래. 사자친구들이 이만매. 이랑지 남친 자공적으로 차도 뒤쳐와서 하고 그래. 그렇게 나지 차도 저 삼지지 중심은 자공도 쉬었으나 나지는 차를 사자치고 들어가랑 인사 자공도 처리되는 대로 과차는데 다른 뭘 먹는 말이지. 대시부 탑에 사마당 hin지리 탑 라치지 예상 못하면 뒤로 다 주든 비차시라고 말이지. 오야 든 라랑게 소리 죄송나.
Then the present consciousness, this discursive mind right now in this moment, actually you need to decide that in essence that is Mahamudra, and there is no other Mahamudra than that. It is just that for now that consciousness has become like a block of ice. And that is also one thing that you need to recognize, that feeling, really experience that feeling of being that ice block. And that is that ice block of self-grasping. And then all that needs to be done to that ice block is to melt it. So there is no need for you to think of it in terms of something that is so like far away, so distant from you. It is just that you need to melt the ice block. And the method to do that that is to cultivate love and compassion. So actually, that is really the easiest of all methods. And you don't need to rely on anything else like scriptures and so forth. It is something that you can really resolve on your own if you practice with diligence. Then regarding all phenomena are mind, conceptually, this is difficult to approach. How do we approach this key aspect within a state of mindful awareness? And is it sufficient to allow phenomena to be as it is, whether outer forms or inner experience, through non-grasping?
Chu tamshi sem res ngan sala pyora chu tamshi sem res ti sake chim nang song yora ti chetang loi tholora ti ko khale khapo yores tini ina nenga chembo yore ti nenga chembo ti denshi dongshin denshi chignang ne ro denshi ngang nenga chembo ti ro khanda ha ko gores pena chu tamche 큰라고리 다 치다와신도 랑가샤로 추 치다와 랑가샤로 되니 추 가래이나 양 소스 시긴나와 야난 난긴나와로 가래이나 디 랑가샤 디 텔라 되는 치고 하콘도 요르 웬nen가 되르와 추 탐치랑 기세면
지 딱지 직접 마땅 대 딱지 동인데 선물요 기타지문이다 살 전부는 이 사제 송만은 이래 마그티 하고 저거도 하방을 가르치고 다다다다 카톡에서 소속이 남도다 뉴모 본심하지세 다리 땅 지시대 속자를 지시대 속자 대민기를 상바당 이제나 ramyin kete sa na to tham ji le la wo da cha ko le sa ba da ni ji na ni mo ba sa le la wo cha ko te la tang tang to to yo le sa ba da ni ji shok chan ni te la ke de ba ji ma ba de ma sa te kar se shi ba de ra song song ni mo bu ji sa ma ra wo che la te ni mo ba de ba shak so ti ji ti ramyin kete cha ngo le ti ji ne ti yang de na ko ka le cha ko le te pa去他们这身上这么的，在大街上被忙着揉的，这最早嘛就送的，身体早就送的，这西巴说我这拿多当头是多，西巴上送是送，在这里，在大坡上上班去，大坡家在这个有人。
So it seems really true that when you really try to analyze that and really understand that, then it's very difficult to really understand conceptually. So therefore, actually, that's something that we shouldn't analyze conceptually. So now you might feel then that that's what the Buddha had said. The Buddha had said that all phenomena are the mind, but it's really hard to comprehend that for me. So if that's how you feel, then what can you do? So what you should do in that case is then you should approach that not from an analytical, conceptual perspective, but from a more direct perspective. And that means you should directly look at the thoughts and afflictions that arise and all your beliefs in a true existence and your labeling of those things and so forth. And so you sustain mindfulness, you make an effort, as you mentioned before, in developing this ongoing state of mindfulness, and also you make an effort in love and compassion. And actually, then it becomes rather easy to let go of all these thoughts, especially when love is present within your mind, then you will be able to let go of the afflictive emotions very easily and very quickly. So make an effort in developing love and compassion. And then when you meditate, do not entertain any thoughts of the past, do not anticipate the future, but look at directly the present moment and sustain clear awareness in that moment. And when thoughts arise, do not follow them. Then those thoughts, those afflictions will then dissolve. And so this is how you gradually resolve that. This is how then this understanding of that all phenomena are mind, that will then naturally actually arise from that practice. So it is a gradual practice. Now, when you right in the outset, when you just try to figure out how it really is that all phenomena are the mind, and you try to analyze that, then you're actually developing more and more thoughts, more and more concepts, and it's hard to understand then. And actually it is that you should not cut through the root of phenomena, but you should cut through the root of the mind. So you must understand actually the mind and not all of these phenomena. So it is actually very simple. You sustain a direct, present moment, clear awareness that recognizes the thought, that lets go of the thought, and that is sustained with stability, and that holds on to love and compassion. And that's really all that needs to be done to understand all of that. And then, within intense devotion, all experience seems to sort of melt into one unified, clear space that is love. Is this Mahamudra, or is it a temporary experience?
당서 무그 작보 기회 갑라라 해바 무그 작보 기회 갑람 참찬딘 얌샤게 요림 다 참아 long salpo yoraba long sal sungchok nang shinchake yores ti long salpo de raba sungchok se ati tiang teba ge rangshin res ti nang chama them ro ge yores me go tapo yebe kabla tini ti sakya chambo res yana ti neka nyam re
내가 그냥이래 사자치 모양이래 대 무도 내가 요리 들이 냠용의 양 저도 하고서 대 가지가지는 용나 디스니스니 지금은 나도 당신 가 소화배서 저거 차원 가서 하고는 사랑 시바들 제 사자치 뭐 통고 요리 변을 드림에 버건 남과랑 상상 통고 요리 사랑을 대로 태만 무슨 인지 전부 제거하는 양대 거래 양용지고 세상 집을 짜고 양용고요 양도 차집을 짜고 짜고는 양용고요고 이 긴장이 아니 제용고요 이 하고들이 오 긴장이 좋래지
So it is both. It is both a temporary experience and also an experience of Mahamudra. So you have this experience of great devotion, and so that experience will stay. So that is, now you know that I've experienced this, and then when it comes again, you will recognize it again because you already experienced it before. And then when it comes again, this experience of devotion, then instantly you will be able to block out all thoughts. Actually, naturally, all the thoughts, just all ordinary thoughts stop, and you will just feel very joyful, very happy, and the mind is very clear. And when you then look at the mind, you see Mahamudra. And in an instant, you see it just like seeing the sky where the clouds have vanished in an instant. And that itself is actually Mahamudra. So that is one time when that happens, but it happens also at other times. It happens, for example, when you feel compassion for sentient beings, then that same experience arises. And it also happens when a negative thought arises. For example, when you're very angry, it happens. Or if you have a very strong feeling of desire arises, and again, that actually happens. So it happens in both cases, whether the condition that arises is so-called positive or negative. And so if you see that, then actually whatever happens, whether it is a positive or a negative circumstance, you will perceive them all as actually conducive or like a friend. Then, if the nature of mind is luminous without any object of reference, on page 26 in the Kangama, how do we know when we are genuinely abiding in the natural state of Mahamudra?
디 강가 만나라 디송고 여러와 생기 무엇이 왜 살와더니 디소 메바 닉 디소 메바 여레스 나라 송고 여러와 데니 당우나 사기야 전복이 난 네다만네 우나 네다만네 간다하고 여레스 진디나 힘들어
네다만네 셈는 잡아내야 저거요 semko chowa ram yingi de ne do sort takje tang samsara me de takje chang me ba ram yin tamba me na kharo chaw yore de ne ba de takje tang yin ma re ne do me do takje tang ram yin ja ya na na to che jang ma sal la me char the ne ba re de na to chowa che na tri ma ne ba re de na to chowa che na ji na to de ji sa ma shor na ji sa ma ra wa che go 나도 맞지어지 야가서야 나도 맞죠 홍시 말에 나도 에더니 나도 지와 탑지 감지 용거를 받네 속을 용거를 받네나 나도 라트로 드리 사자 좀 보여 봤다 대리 나도 라마트 나도 지시 쇼너들이 다른 사자 좀 보고 근데 세군 내려오는 애들을 말해 봤다 아래 나도 트라마를 다 거려
So how you know that you're actually abiding in a state of Mahamudra can be seen by whether or not you're grasping at anything at all. And so then when you're abiding in a state of Mahamudra, it is a very natural state where there is no concept of, for example, I'm abiding still or I'm not abiding still. So there is a natural state that is completely clear and empty, like a cloud-free sky. It is just that. And when you abide within that state, then do not analyze that state. Do not develop concepts of, am I really abiding in it or not? Just let the mind be naturally, without thoughts, clearly and empty, and just remain within that without trying to figure out what that actually is. So when you abide within that state without grasping, then that is a sign that you're really abiding in Mahamudra. But then when thoughts arise and you follow those thoughts, it is a sign that you're not abiding in Mahamudra. And so when thoughts arise, abiding in Mahamudra does not mean that there is never any thought arising, but thoughts arise, but you do not follow those thoughts. So they arise, but they cannot actually move the mind or disturb the mind in any way, affect you in any way. So it arises and dissolves just on its own without any grasping at it at all. And if that is that state of mind you're abiding in, then that is a sign of abiding in Mahamudra. And if not, if thoughts arise and then you follow those thoughts, then it is a sign that you are not yet abiding in Mahamudra. You're not yet abiding in the actual natural state of the mind because you have not yet liberated those thoughts. So in brief, whether or not you're abiding in genuine Mahamudra can be seen by looking at whether or not you're able to liberate thoughts. Then, I think that's also, I forgot that. I have a question about karma and effort in practice and achieving goals, both worldly and spiritual. It is said that one's karma dictates what will happen in the life and what can be accomplished. However, Milarepa says that one can achieve any goal, even the ultimate achievement, in one lifetime by virtue of effort, tenacity, persistence, and diligence. These 2 points appear to contradict each other. Why put effort and practice if karma has already decided everything that will happen?
하상은 저 레기움데 고라 무슨 소인바 당한서 다리도시다 지야 요마리스 사말레 난친도고 요라바 당한서양 지당 냠렌 지야들래 양서 냠렌 도 람도라마도양 레라티스라레기 요사라바 디티인도 당한서 추치팅 가레이나 레라라기 요리라 디니 이나 디니 다나밀라 레파디 송기 요라바 우네 촌데 다우지치나 디니 다 미치치기나라 타도 다 상게 토고 요레스 다 텔라 페낭서 촌데 치야 디니 다 뉴르치나 디니 디나 una pitchin da kale jagores ra una reposition yorava tang una sana tidis kalta yorava chiknga so pe sorba chembo jagores kale mambo jagores pitchin chegores nine nga so yang sama le res yorava ta kale shira jago mares tidis kalta yores ta kale gore
le na ta te le ti ji a ma ga sa ja le devan dongina mang per ti junge ti ka chi wa ta la por da chu jago 강이 자고는 레를 가게 자야 그래 따따따랑 게 생군 유모바 저기 하고는 생 유모바 빵 들이 상초서 뭐 파르도서 막 톡티 가게 자케요라 진짜 직접 맞지 라비오 말아 다다동 요나양 지었으마 다들 이제 지양하면 레레 지었으마 스마 같이 다들 레라 뛰지 다다 수는 우저도 거라 소남다 이시 손이 몸자고 요리 벌써 또와 먹고 싶어서 소진 생기지만 상지 그런 곰잡고 가비 소와 직접 마고 생포는 소와 메버랑이 센터사 오리지 삽돌 메바지 소와치 마고 랑기 요리지 소와를 마치 바래 대소고 요리니 피도와 담고 잠을 하죠 말아 소와 마지죠 레도 마지 샤르레라 레가 카르치나 레도 쳔모 마지 레가 드럽스
It is said that the experiences in this life of happiness and suffering are the results of the actions, the karma that you have created in previous lives. And what will happen in future lives depends on the actions, the karma that you create now. And actually, you should make a great effort in creating the right causes. So if there's anything that we need to make an effort in, then it is karma, observing the law of karma, cause and effect. And that means that you recognize that the cause of all suffering are the afflictive emotions, and then you abandon those afflictive emotions. And you are making an effort in the activities of the bodhisattvas, the 6 paramitas, and so on. So no one is saying that you shouldn't do anything at all. But when we teach on karma, we are introduced to the reason why there is suffering now in this life. So it is said that if you wish to know what you did in the past, look at your present life, your present body. And if you want to know where you will go next, then look at your present actions. So it is actually necessary to make a great effort in the 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom, and to meditate, to practice the 6 paramitas, and so on. So when we speak about in the context of there no effort is needed, this effortless state, and what is meant with that is that the Buddha had said that your own mind is the Buddha. And because it's already the Buddha, you don't have to make it the Buddha through an effort. So the mind already is that. That's your natural state, and you just need to recognize that. And when you recognize that, then that's what you already are, without any effort or any striving. So you don't need to strive to become something, because you already are that. That is what is meant with effortless. In other words, you're not really trying to become something else that you not already are. So you already are that. You only need to recognize that. So it doesn't say that you don't need to make an effort in anything else, in any practice, though. We do need to make an effort, but now what is meant with everything follows karma, nothing much we can do. What is meant is that we do need to make an effort, creating the right causes, the right karma, but without any hope and fear about the outcome of what we do. But no one is saying that you don't have to do anything. You do actually have to work hard.
There is now a ride share board in the hallway outside the office, kind of nearish the front door. So if any
So we do have a few more questions actually left, but also we have to finish the book because some of you have to leave after those teachings today. So we will continue with our teachings on the Ganges now, and then actually we will have more time for questions tomorrow. So coming back to the Mahamudra text, there's not so much left. So we are now on page 28, and we just finished the Supreme King of Fruitions, and then we continue with In the Beginning and so on.
Remi Rangne, Dev Japo Choi, also. Japo Shivade Song Kanajina, Saja Tawadi, Semla Tomla, Teniso, Japo Rangi, Tagliores, Sotinizena, 3 Sa Choksem Navani, Gozota Tondamni, Tondam Getini, Notini, Kundi Nira, 3 chapter 1 Giri, Kakayona, 1 Jazagini, or Mary, they are laboratory, they in Jim, Jawolo, Chadi, your heads. When you have Tondam was Hajimata, Mato, Notary, Sabat, Semivachadi, the Mato was something, the one between gates, the Jawoshipa, the singing engagement for your such as Jikami, the Donna Sajimoto, Mato, the Sabat Semiki, Machility, the thing Manovari, the Inky Bomber Soromochiga song, Tony Dor English of Kikivari, Yamti Cheshute, Tota Cheshute, so Namang Drama, Shanate, Kito, Maton, so somebody Hingivana, their season, 3 of your heads, David Japoshi by the Teres.
So then next, so actually the last line here, it says, abiding at ease, free of any hope, is the supreme king of fruitions. And so actually this term king here, what does that really mean? Now when you really achieve that view, when you realize the view of Mahamudra, you become like a king. And so now that is actually the accomplishment of the twofold bodhicitta, the relative and the ultimate. From the ultimate perspective, you realize that samsara and nirvana all are encompassed by awareness, by wisdom, and there is no separation, there is no duality. And realizing that, you become like a king. And from a relative perspective, actually before you actually can realize the truth of Mahamudra, you need to train the mind in immeasurable love and an unobjectified compassion for those sentient beings who have not realized that. Just like a king who has great compassion for his subjects, you have compassion for all sentient beings. So actually, in truth, what really determines your realization of Mahamudra, the realization of Mahamudra really depends on your having developed immeasurable love. If you have developed that, then that is an unmistaken way to realize Mahamudra. And Khenpo Munse Rinpoche had also said that a sign of realizing, having realized emptiness, actually the greatest sign of having realized emptiness is great compassion. And that is actually the most amazing and the greatest accomplishment, the greatest sign of accomplishment that can be achieved. So he said. And he also said that you should not really pay any attention to all of these experiences and visions and so on that might arise. These are not actually indications of any realization of emptiness. So don't think about those, but use your level of love and compassion as a determining factor on whether or not, like a measure on whether or not you have realized emptiness. So that is the fruition, which is like a king.
어딘가 지금 먹고서는 딜랑도 한정 되다. 그래도 침보들이 저 강의만 보는 거요. 대통령이 강의에서 하고 왔으니까 바로 조간 같다 하지 마. 랑도 주고 시라고 제가 좀 바꿔서 여랑 살아들이 시작되는 남도 지서만 하는 동네 연구 말이 뒤쳐와서 남도 지서 나오는 동네 연구도 지서만 파야절 철람데 민도도 상태고 바로 조간 같다 하지 마. 조탈때 남도 셈이 찌발해서 남도 살 철랍들이 차도도 나도 셈이 하공의 셈이 이 가까이 온 말이 동당물이 나중에 온 말이 대대 상로당신 당시들이 동고너들이 바로 세상을 랑나 세상이 좀 하고는 나사를 세트고 다마초치 마운트 반라서 사자지부 동문에서 하고 나중에 독서 하고 그래 딱 고사로 사자지부 같은 당보디 샤요래 뒤까지 강의시라 매우 참을 했어.
And so then what follows from here, the next verses then explain the different levels of the path of practicing Mahamudra. So first it says, in the beginning, mind is like a river rushing down a gorge. So in the beginning, the mind is like a violent river who very quickly rushes down a steep mountain. And so then as it rushes down that mountain gorge, the water takes everything with it. It washes everything away, all the earth and the rocks and the wood and so on. All of that are flushed away by the water. And so similarly, now here at this point in the beginning, we are controlled by the afflictive emotions still. Even though you're meditating and even though you recognize the afflictive emotions, you still become controlled by them, just like this violent river rushing down the mountain gorge. And so what happens here is that why that happens is, in the beginning when you first meditate, many people say that ever since I'm meditating, I have even more thoughts than before. All my problems, my difficulties are actually increasing now. And so that is how it really seems to be in the beginning. And that is just because previously you have not actually taken a look at your mind. So you didn't really see what's actually arising there all the time. You just always blindly followed whatever arises. You followed all your impulses and you engaged in all kinds of actions that then again bind you up in various different difficulties. You're caught up in various difficulties. And meanwhile, you have no awareness of what's really happening actually. So you have accumulated a lot of garbage actually. And now for the first time, you are shining the light on the garbage and you see all the trash in there for the first time. And that's actually a good thing. So you should think that seeing all of that is a good thing. That's a good quality. And then because once you have seen it, then you can also do something to clean up the mess in the mind. So only when you see it can you actually purify the mind. And so then you move on to continue your practice. So here, what you develop first is that wisdom that knows what to do and what not to do. So then you develop thoughts of love and compassion, and you are able to separate out those thoughts of selfishness and the afflicted thoughts and so on. And then you're able to engage in the bodhisattva deeds, like practicing the 6 paramitas and so on. And of these, actually, the paramita of patience is actually most important. Actually, all Dharma practice, in the end, comes down to really practicing patience. And we can also say that patience is the same as wisdom. The essence of wisdom really is patience. Or we say the view. The view here, this view of Mahamudra, is really very strongly connected to the practice of patience. If you are able to sustain the view with clarity, then naturally, you, as a sign of that, you will be able to be patient patient with anything. And if you are not in the view, then you're not able to practice patience. You cannot be patient. Then you will be controlled by whatever arises. So if you're able to be patient, no matter what difficulty, whether it is positive or negative things that arise, whatever arises, if you're able to remain with stability, unmoved by whatever happens, then with that patience is actually the most supreme kind of patience, that the best patience to practice. And so therefore you can see how it is related to the view. If your view of Mahamudra is very stable, then naturally you will patiently forbear any kind of difficulties. If your view is not strong, if your awareness is not strong, then you will not be able to bear anything. You cannot practice any forbearance no matter what happens, whether it's good or bad. You will not be able to bear any hardships. You will not even able to bear any desire, any pleasure, even the slightest. You will just follow whatever arises. And for example, you think that I really want that. You cannot bear not to have that. Or you think that I really don't want that, so you cannot bear to have that. So there is no patient forbearance at all if you do not have that stability. And then you will be tossed around by hopes and fears, and you will always run into difficulties and be caught up in all kinds of troubles as a result. And so now as you continue to practice, when you recognize that, you continue to practice sustaining awareness, and then you come to the second step. In the middle, it flows slowly like the river Ganges. So here you have developed this wisdom that discerns between what should be done and what should be given up. You have gained more stability, and you're able to let go of what arises, and then everything that arises dissolves naturally on its own. You're not following all these thoughts and afflictions any longer. And then you gain an experience here. The experience you gain is that if I do not follow all these thoughts, I actually do not suffer. But if I follow all these thoughts, then I suffer. So that's the crucial experience you gain here. And this is how you then learn through that experience to let go of those thoughts. Because when you let them go, they will just disappear on their own. So you just let them be, and they will disappear. And then you habituate to that, and then in the end, it says, in the end, it is like a stream reuniting with its mother, the sea. So then you realize that it's all only the mind. Whatever arises, it's all one. It's all the mind. Whatever arises is just like a wave arising on water and subsiding back. So ultimately, actually, thoughts are the mind. There is really no difference. And the one who recognizes those thoughts, that awareness, is also that same mind, actually. So they are not separate. They're not two different things. So here, ultimately, you realize non-duality, the non-duality of self and others. And if you have that, then, for example, if anger arises, you will instantly recognize the fault in anger, and upon arising, the anger will already dissolve into itself. So here in the last stage, you realize, you recognize Mahamudra. And what you recognize here is the non-dual nature of self and other. So this is actually the first understanding of Mahamudra, like recognition of Mahamudra that arises. And when that arises, then from there on, you will not encounter many difficulties any longer.
추어지는 잡을 초르스게바 남고 차바 카와 처럼 데라서바 탐치 오치과에 제나기지니 감슴선지 사지선지요 세우제 저바레지 그래서 뭐는 이제 과자 차들이 죽지 마운트 받아서 이제 나와타 조스
So actually this is the river Ganges and how it all converges and reunites with the sea. That should be rather easy to understand actually. There's only one such a thing called water in this world. It all has the same nature. Whether it's the ocean water or the rain water or blocks of ice and so on, all of that has the same nature, and that is water. And similarly, as it is said in the Samantabhadra prayer, the minds of all sentient beings in the three worlds of samsara and the minds of all the Buddhas have a single basis. So this is what we understand here when the stream reunites with the mother. So basically, this is what is called resolving or deciding upon the view. And so if this is hard to understand, then you can also reflect on looking like the nature of humans and animals, for example, because these are beings you can actually see. And when you look at both kind of beings, you will find that actually we are the same. And just like humans, also animals, everyone wants to be happy and nobody wants to suffer. We have the same afflictions in our mind. So we really are the same. We just appear differently. Our bodies are different. Some are larger, smaller, and so forth. But really our mind is exactly the same. And you will understand that if you really reflect on that again and again. For example, the affliction of anger is exactly the same in essence in the mind of a human or an animal. So as you reflect on that, you must come to an understanding where you know that this is really how it is. And so that is what we call an understanding.
Tisa Tipa Sama, you were to go to Magon, Secretaries. Gone the Rang Hako, Rang Sawakil, Rang Tachu Horace.
And so then next it says, proponents of the mantra or paramita vehicles, the Vinaya and the other scripture collections will not reveal the luminosity of Mahamudra through expounding the texts and philosophical traditions. And so now all of the teachings of the Buddha in brief, the sutras and the tantras, they all are called, together they are called the words of the Buddha. And so within those words of the Buddha, there are various divisions, different tenet systems, and so forth. And each tradition calls their own tradition a certain name, and so on. And so what this is saying here is that all of that, through only that, you cannot see the luminosity of Mahamudra. So that should not be misunderstood. So people might think that, like this is quite a statement, actually, to say that all of these words of the Buddha will not lead to Mahamudra. So this is not how you should understand it. What this means is that even you learn, you study and you reflect on all of the teachings, all of the scriptures. No matter how many scriptures you study, you also have to actually practice them. You have to meditate on them. And if you do not put them into practice, then you will not see the luminosity of Mahamudra. So the point is that, of course, you need to study them, but also you need to practice them. So that is the important point here. And then if in a mind without engagement and free of wanting anything, thoughts will arise and subside on their own like ripples on water. So in order to see the luminosity of Mahamudra, you must free yourself of wanting anything. So the mind must be free of wanting anything, of all desire, basically free of all grasping. And when the mind is free of all grasping, it is whatever arises then becomes like a wave on water that subsides upon arising. And as a result of that, you will finally realize non-duality. And so to be free of any desire, to be free of wanting anything, is that when that thought arises, as it arises, it dissolves on its own naturally. So you're not holding on to it. And by that you realize that what arises, that thought and the mind itself, are actually not separate. So all fixation in the mind must completely disappear. So why do we not see the nature of Mahamudra? It is because of that. So we must study and reflect, but that is not sufficient if you do not meditate. If you do not practice that, then you will never decide upon the view. And then in terms of how to resolve that view from the perspective of the path of practice, often people make a difference between the practices of Mahamudra or Dzogchen, and then they say there's a difference in like the newer transmission and the older transmission and so on. And some even say that the result is different, and that is a complete mistake. The result cannot be different, because the result ultimately must be the same, and that is to free the mind of all grasping at any true reality of whatever arises and the characteristics. So in brief, what this is saying is that to realize Mahamudra, only learning and reflecting will not be enough. You also must meditate and practice. And through meditation, you will gain a personal experience. And based on that personal experience and that personal seeing, you will decide upon the view.
다지 니지 디보 요바 테라 제그 가자 이나 코 데이터로 이제 딱과 고중도 되면 이제 이런 당에 도마 송고 당에 잡고스 다 유모와 코는 창게다 다시 당직 도마 송기나 다 유모 바에 코를 제tam 창와 대상 것들이지 레사 않고 요래 유모 바람 맞으나 코라 요 나사도 차대요래 동으로 다 강연 체험 거 요래 별까리 단지 제다오늘 정상지 지연 거 요래 나도 직장 매번 고민자를 같이 들라고 나도 직장 매번 동과 차용도 뒤중에 동과 차와는 이런 인증상 제도 다 영향 될 수있는 다사지 명바 차차다 미네 레빈 거요래 너는 탐색 냠지 말라는 동이 용고 지송고요래 대외들이 사실 전부 20니스메 비시 또나 유모 받은 미네 뭐 이시라 저런 거 뭐 이시라 미 무슨 양지 용나 그래서 야, 시장 치보지. 가다 팔아마다 소리 시장하고 오르지는 물에 대마사디 시장 소원 매와더니 좀 걸다 봤대로 어디 차라. 우리 살짝 쳐보대. 때문에 싸워는 뭐 이실인 줄지. 때문에 뭐 이실에 랍토고 요래. 샘당 뭐 타면 돼 봐요. 생광 이제 시바디 이시메 데르지네 시에트고 요래. 이거 동물하고 냠서 소소소소 나노나 되니 다 강에 동인 체험 요래서 또 부성동 담세 동원이냐
And then observing vows conceptually, you betray the point of true samaya. And so that is, there is still a very firm belief in self-other duality in place. And because of that, because of this firm belief, you see the other and you criticize them. For example, you think that, oh, he's always like that, and he always has these mistakes. But I have this vow, so I have to be careful. So if you think in that way, you actually, you're thinking you're keeping a vow, you're thinking you're keeping a samaya, but really it actually is power driven by an afflicted state of mind. So there still are afflictions. So you're keeping your vow, your samaya, but then still the mind is afflicted, and therefore you're still accumulating karma because you have not eliminated the afflictive emotion in your mind. And that is just like you still have this hidden disease in your stomach, inside you. So it's still there. And as a result of that still being there, you will still encounter difficulties later on. Because when there is self-grasping, there is bound to be fear. Some people actually say that they have this experience that when they meditate in a state without any thinking and it becomes all empty, that suddenly within this emptiness there is this natural feeling of fear arising in them. And that actually is that subtle underlying affliction that is still there, now ripening, now coming up. So karma is still ripening. And because of that, we are really, because of the presence of affliction, the samaya on the ultimate level is naturally declines, and therefore, because there are afflictions, we will always encounter difficulties. And then later, when you actually realize non-duality, when you realize Mahamudra, then the afflictive emotions ripen into primordial wisdom. That is, if you truly meditate, and for example, a feeling of a really strong anger arises in you, you're angry with someone, and then if you truly meditate and look at the nature of your own anger, then instantly that feeling of anger is already gone, and you can laugh about it. You start laughing. And that is Mahamudra. That is what we call the afflictive emotion has transformed into primordial wisdom. And at that point, you can say say that the afflictions are this primordial wisdom. It is because from that perspective, there is really no distinction between the mind and the afflictive emotion. So from that perspective, you can see them actually as equivalent, as just one actually. But to really see it that way, you need to gain your own personal experience in that first. Because if not, if you do not gain this experience through personal practice, then you will just continue to encounter a lot of difficulties and suffering.
Mene me tong ma da na mene dina da ji ni ji shi ba chong sa ji le me mene ne se le me ba tam che da wa cha de rang ji ni me na ni me de me ba tam che da wa me ba me pe hin ji ni ji yo de me ba me ba kang li 甚至他们这个就这当地有嘛，甚至在上面，不管本身在拉说吧，这里。 你甚至没习惯没来呢，没把明白让这个茶叶过来，本来注重的说呢，但是没把他们那些这里没把讲没吧，刚刚没把，这里茶叶过来没来没买，我这到底习惯这样的嘛这呢，这当时年纪有嘛，当时年纪没准备，这你茶你人这把手里这里茶上多把这茶上多把这里当时年过来，你这我唱。 我觉得没呢，东港人没买，我东港人没买过身体，说东南看到到了这个多怎么？啥人怎么样？现在啥人怎么办吧？是不是东南看到这样的马云呢？这当时也没办法，后面那就是别人你妈的别插牙药的，当时也没办法准备。
And then neither focus on an object nor abiding anywhere. If you do not stray from the actual truth, the unimpaired samaya is a light in the darkness. So, not abiding anywhere. That means that you are not engaging. You're not abiding within the dualistic view of self and other. So there is not even the most subtle of grasping to a duality. So you're not abiding anywhere. And then not focused on an object, that is, you're free from all reference point. That really is the unobjectified compassion. There is compassion, but there is no, it is not focused on an object here. So there is a natural feeling of love for all sentient beings. It is like a natural radiance of love that just pervades them all without any intentional thought of, I have compassion for this and for that and so on. So there is no focus on any object. So when it is said actually in the Bodhicharya Avatara that when you abide, when you are in a state, a non-dual state where you do not abide in dualistic grasping, then this unobjectified state where you're not focused on any object naturally actually arises. It comes naturally from not grasping. So when all thoughts dissolve on their own, settle on their own, then naturally this unobjectified state of compassion arises. And then if you never separate from that awareness, from that state of mind, then the samaya can never degenerate. And then as a result, it says, then that is the unimpaired samaya. It is a light in the darkness. So if you grasp at a duality, then there will be thoughts of attachment and aversion. And if there are those afflictions in your mind, then the samaya will degenerate. So the samaya will be impaired. if there is no dualistic grasping, then you're not abiding anywhere. There is no grasping at anything, and therefore, as a result, naturally, you're not focused on an object. And the mind abides without grasping in a space-like state that is just clear and empty. So everything is actually, the entire meaning of all of these words comes down to just that, abiding without grasping in the clear, empty space-like nature. If you abide within that state without movement, so with stability, if you remain within that state, then that is this unimpaired samaya, and that is like the sun, or it is like a light in the darkness.
When Sanjay can go shop, the shadow part of the somebody, then Sanjay she was shrub and do some half on the Maha or this other. The notion of man forward something little song. Touch over
and then it says, if free of any wish, you do not dwell in extremes, you will see the meaning of all the Buddha's teachings without exception. So to be free of any wish and to not dwell in extremes. So to be free of any wish is to be free of any grasping. That is, grasping at what you want and grasping at what you don't want. So you're free of all grasping. That is to be free of any wish. And then you do not dwell in extremes, and that is, you do not dwell in the extreme of eternalism, so you do not believe that things really exist, and you do not dwell in the extreme of nihilism, you do not deny that things exist. So you're actually abiding in the middle way. That is the view of the Madhyamaka, or the middle way. So here in the middle way resolves that the nature of the mind through words of reasoning. It resolves that the nature of the mind is without existence or non-existence, beyond that. So through if the nature of the mind can be resolved through words, then it is those words of the Madhyamaka or the Pramana, the teachings on the valid cognition, and so on. And so here then you will see the meaning of the Buddha's teachings without exception. And that is the entirety of the Buddha's teachings, all the scripture collections. The meaning of all the scripture collections is included within that. And that is the ultimate truth. And in order to realize the ultimate truth, you need to first realize the relative truth. If you do not enter the path of love and compassion, then you will not be able to realize the ultimate truth. And a sign of that, a sign of not having realized the ultimate truth, is that there are still a lot of doubts in your mind. And that is also called the subtle obscuration to omniscience. So within that, the meaning of all the Buddha's teachings is complete. So the very essence of all Dharma, the root of all Dharma, is complete within these words. Or you can think that everything comes down to, everything is complete within the perfection of wisdom. Or as we said, the heart essence of the Buddha is this discriminating wisdom. Everything is included within that. And knowing that, then you need to decide upon that.
Mudra Jordan Corson Tars Tatil Quasa Bolingore Corson Taro Hobasong Zonkan Kare Ya Padang Kowa the name of Yona in Pasa Yomara Tap Kang Chess Yomara the Rawan may be paid, Coverton Maduna, the she that they were Rawan may be paid. They carried the songs in or such as what happens in course on the tower is. Taloka, Riga Takato, Takonja. I've been on Nato, Mumo Shokshibos, and Shedang Tower, Tachidang the Che, Shedang the Che, Delta, Ranger Tone. The water shed down the chin, that gets us over the shit. I tell him to buy short, three to the car in the door. That is some horror for the place of she language chase once. That the way told to me, that's his own. She's over she language. Some would try to chase on, the least like chase on. They get us all chase on, the Lungaris are. The way she do what challenge is something, I saw this or language is what. That's all children. Tati dungi tir tagona ta tarto yo mari rangs bari tarto yo mari saja chibona dungi ti khobsone tagore tatarang te na namto shedang te jebakami ko 어디 중치고 말이지 shedang kwang 중치고래 하고서 shedang kwang 중치고래 띵한 야송 shedang 나송 that's what they say me. 다다랑 때문에 중국에 살 신랑 때문에 마타를 양당 zong들이 레산 토바자들이 doctor들이 감지자 doctor로 다다랑 남도 깨끗한 방송도 남도 깨끗한 탈나 중앙 tuy에는 다그도 진양용지실 다미리 다사제 정말 다 생각 내려고 사자서 뭐 따고 말이 생각 시합 너도 좀 시합돼 소소랑 거 보이시대 There is the patches of glory. Jumdi treasure tower hakono, Joshetang David Nami Dungi, Nekabang Dungi, Tatoya Dungi, doubling Shitang Sility Hako, Dungi the Shiro, Shitang Chirtaka, Muling Shitang Tasum, Halia, Tamuli Takados, Muzgom Jan, Swadish, Tanyam Yongdi, Tati Goazi, the hot Takadom, or Takados. No, Jinchi, maybe she don't kill me, just young. Three thoughts, she don't kill my chicken, but I thought home young dorsum don't home young dorsum don't say to that's a quality tire is been to the call it soon it's hard, so the young married themselves. Oh, thing she don't do it, but how come as that she don't do it. So double captain she to what I just said, I'm right. Nang rang minimum doing the Shilang rat. Not just Shilang red. Legally, Larry saw him and a young celeb. Rang Shedang Jow matter that only Charlie is a Tamata, quite new cherry. This over the Shilang Tan, don't touch it. Mother. Take that such as a door, place it out, all matter. That dogs a king is a treasure sheet. You know what a dog is dog, Mr. Shane is old. That's our nothing young boy. Corson Talokti, the young day of the law, young day of the summer tongue. They gone, the nothing young boy, the catchbody. 다소도 제당 요면오나 대상로다 시당 치는데 양당도 곰 시당지가 공런도 거다가 랑런도 거다 딱 시당 따라 곰자 거래 얘는 다 좋아만 보더니 다지들 곰자 들이다가 그리스로 시라 상로다 다다들 소소 시당 치고 제사로는 팀마지 곰 대시당 질서도 그렇다.
And then the next line says, if you attend to this truth, you will be freed from the prison of samsara. And so here we really have to actually gain a very profound understanding here. To become freed from the prison of samsara, how do we become freed from the prison of samsara? And actually, what kind of prison is that actually? That's samsara. What kind of prison is it? So we all experience suffering, and no one wants to suffer. We all want to be free from suffering, but then we have no control over that. We don't know how to be free from suffering. We don't have the method to be free from suffering. So that's really an example of how we lack any freedom at all. So we don't want to suffer, and we are fully even aware of our suffering. We know that we suffer, and we don't want to suffer, but we still suffer because we have no way to be free from that. And when you realize Mahamudra, you will become freed from the prison of samsara. And how do you become freed? It is through practicing meditation. Now, when thoughts arise, so thoughts and afflictive emotions, for example, anger arises. So anger arises. You're angry at your friend. Actually, you love that friend very much, but now you're angry at that friend. Because you're angry, you're saying something very hurtful to them. And then because of that, you start to argue, you fight. And in the end, you separate. This is how families get destroyed. So what has happened here? Now, who has destroyed that? It was your own anger. Your own anger has destroyed that. So you have actually created that yourself. There already was suffering, and then you build up suffering upon suffering. You create more and more suffering. And why? Because of the anger in your mind. Actually, it starts with first you're jealous, and then because of that you get angry, and then you say something very hurtful. So who did that? You did that. And why did you do that? Because you consider yourself as most important, because you're selfish. So then you suffer, and you don't want to suffer. You want to be free from that suffering, but you can't. You don't know how. So you have created your own suffering, but you can't free yourself from it. So when you practice Mahamudra, you liberate yourself from the prison of samsara. So then how is it when you get angry? For example, so you get angry at your friend again, and then you think that actually the fault does not lie in my friend, but the fault lies in my own anger. That's the greatest fault. And then you remain within that state of knowing that. And if you remain within that state, then your anger will be lost, and you will not accumulate negative karma. And then it arises again, and you practice again. On the other hand, if you don't recognize that moment of anger, then you act out on it, and then later you get angry again, and then it will only get worse and worse in the future. You start fighting and arguing, you even go to court with each other and so forth. It just gets worse and worse. So when the anger arises right now, actually, this is how the prison of samsara is created. That one thought right now creates the prison of samsara. And when you liberate that one thought, then you have become liberated from the prison of samsara. And it is necessary to gain an actual experience in that. So when you see what happens when you liberate one thought, then you actually know that this is really how it is. This is how I become free from the prison of samsara. So there's no need to think about like high terms like Mahamudra and realizing Mahamudra Mahamudra and so on. What you really need to identify with Mahamudra and all of that is your mind, that wisdom, that discriminating wisdom that knows what to do and what not to do. And that is it. That's the one that you need to, that's your state of Mahamudra. And that's your wisdom mind that you actually can develop faith and devotion in. That wisdom within yourself knows the subtle workings of karma. It knows what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So it knows that if I get angry again and again and I act out on anger, it will ripen and it will lead to suffering in this life temporarily and also in future lives in the long term. And it is this anger that has actually created all of the suffering in this world that we can see. So when you really experience that, then like you will actually experience a feeling of amazement. You will feel that is really so amazing. Really, I was able to liberate the anger. Now I'm really free. I'm really liberated. And so that experience, that feeling that you gain, you must habituate through practice. So first, it starts with an understanding. So you understand. Somebody tells you that when you liberate the thought, you're liberated from the prison of samsara. So that's what they said. I understand that. And then you have to put that into practice continuously. Every single time anger and so on arises, you have to experience that, how that is when the mind becomes liberated. And then that's the second step. And then the third step is realization. So then eventually, when it makes almost no more difference whether anger arises or not, it all becomes the same. So when you realize that, then you become finally liberated from the prison of samsara. And that is something you didn't know before. So it says, if you rest in it evenly, the veils of negativity and ignorance will be burned away. So this ignorance is, so here you then realize, as you experience, you realize that before I was ignorant. I didn't recognize the fault in my own anger. But now I can really see it. There is a great fault in anger. This is why all the countries in this world fight. This is why families break. It is all because of anger. So now I've understood that my real enemy is actually anger. Or in the 37 practices, it says, if you do not tame the enemy of your inner hatred, the outer enemies will only increase. So when you really practice that, you will really understand what that actually means. So first you understand that, and then you need to experience it. So you understand that anger is my real enemy, and then you practice, and then it goes away, and finally you realize that is when you realize Mahamudra. And actually, it is said that your level of realization can be seen in the face of difficulties. So when you encounter a difficult circumstance, that will reveal your level of realization. So in the face of an adverse circumstance, for example, you get angry at someone, this is where you need to practice, where you need to gain the experience. And this is then how you liberate yourself from the prison of samsara. So actually just this line here, this verse is really very meaningful, and you should read that again and again, and you should really reflect on that again and again, and you should practice it, gain an experience of it. That is really actually an extremely important instruction, this verse here. So now, as you go to have your lunch in the break time, you try to bring to mind someone that you don't really like, someone that you feel like an aversion against. So bring to mind the person that you like the least, and then reflect on that and practice with that all the time, continuously. And then as you meditate, you will really see that who really actually is the one that loses out in the end. Is it yourself or the other? Actually, you will find it's yourself. So we have gone through different questions, and we also analyzed all of that. And now it's also time to meditate and put that into practice. So as you go about your break time, do that. Bring to mind someone that really triggers your anger, and then practice at that. And then look who really actually is harmed by your anger.
Oh, money, pay me home. Oh, money, pay me home. Oh, money, pay me home. Namo Sangaya. Namo Sangaya. Chapter of the that's ain't terrible.